This is Talking Drupal, a bi-weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 134, Wednesday, December 14th, 2016. High availability with Drupal. So joining us today, we have Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Development. I changed the order up this week.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. I wasn't ready. So, good afternoon. It's pretty chilly up here, but we've had a bunch of snow in the last week or so, and so my dog has discovered that he enjoys running around with blocks of ice almost as much as he likes running around with balls. But when he drops the ice, he can't find it in the snow, so it's pretty entertaining.
That's funny. Yeah. So this is the first winter with the dog.
Yeah, he's pretty hilarious in the snow. So
that's good. So it sounds like he's sticking around, huh?
We'll see. He's calming down after the renovation. Now that he's got a chance to get out a bit more.
Now that he's not locked in a single room all day. What? Can you blame him? Right?
Yeah. It wasn't his fault. We got a bigger cage for him. He outgrew his old one, so he's happier.
Awesome. We also have John Picozzi from Oomph.
Good afternoon.
Sporting your Boston Red Sox gear today.
I am. Yeah, it was. I didn't do my hair today, so this is a an effort to hide that.
Oh, okay. There's not a lot of hair to do, so I mean, it should have been a quick job.
That is true. There's more on my face than on my head. So
that's right.
It should have been easy, but sometimes the easy things are hard.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about high availability Drupal. Before we get to that, got a few things in housekeeping I want to take care of. First is apology to our listener Sarah, who in last week's episode I referred to her as Sharon. I made a typo and I guess in our show notes. So, Sarah, we thank you for your feedback and question on FileZilla, and hope our answer helped you out. And I apologize for that name mistake. Also, I wanted to thank Richard Scott for doing some sharing of our episodes on Google Plus over the past week. We appreciate that. And you've heard us in the last few episodes talking about bonus content. So we have a Talking Drupal newsletter now that if you go to any episode like last week's talkingdrupal.com/133, you'll see an opportunity to sign up for a newsletter and get bonus content. So we have people reviewing the bonus content and they're enjoying it. I want to thank Michael, the listener, for pointing out a typo in the newsletter and the bonus content in the URL. So I have fixed that. Unfortunately, everyone who's received it in the email already has the wrong URL, but moving forward, it will be clean. So thank you for that tip, Michael, and I appreciate you listening. So let's move on to our tips of the week. John, what do you have for us?
My tip is basic and easy. DrupalCon sessions are open, so submit your sessions, buy your tickets, and we'll see you in Baltimore.
You know, I think there is a deadline coming up very quickly, or is it already passed for early bird?
No, I can't believe the early bird would already be done. This email only came out last.
I thought I saw a message that discount tickets were going off. I'm looking.
Now I'm feverishly looking because I want to make sure I get my ticket before.
Well, it says buy your early bird, and the date is 4:50, and it ends. I can't tell. Maybe you could figure that out, John.
I'm working towards that.
Good. All right. So, Nick, let's go on to your tip of the week.
So my tip of the week has to do with multilingual sites. So I had the distinct joy of working on a multilingual site this week and needing to programmatically deal with languages and switching. And it's just about as easy as you would expect. You can set individual fields and individual nodes language just by using the language code in the metadata wrapper. So that's pretty straightforward. But depending on how the site is set up, it's important not to forget about all the different globals. So a Drupal site uses a bunch of different methods to determine language, and one of the more common ones is using the URL. So you have a language global, but you also have a language URL global and a language admin global. So there's a bunch of different places where you might have to set language. And probably the strangest bug that I think I may have ever run into in Drupal.
That's what you always say.
Yeah, but this one's really up in the top 10, and incredibly difficult to diagnose. We were having an issue where we were creating these nodes programmatically and setting their language. Worked perfectly locally, but as soon as we deployed to Pantheon, we would randomly get Japanese in all the nodes, no matter what language we had set. And what I finally was able to deduce was the language detection was set to the URL, and Pantheon uses a .in domain to manage drush. So the website, when you were running the drush command, was looking at .in, and there was no language associated with the .in top-level domain, so it just went to the next one alphabetically that was available, and that happened to be Japanese.
Oh, boy, yeah.
So
It was easy to find.
Considering it took the better part of a week, considering the deployment would take about a half an hour.
Right.
And there was a lot of red herrings trying to fix things locally. So,
so did you use our tips from the last episode on debugging?
I used those tips and then some, and it just, it was one of those situations where I was going to sleep at night and went, oh my God, they used drush.in to SSH into the Pantheon server and run the drush command. It must be doing that. And I looked at it, and sure enough, the next available language after I was J, which was Japanese.
Very strange.
Yeah, so it's pretty fun to get around to.
So an update on the ticket price question. Ticket prices, early bird pricing is until March 3rd at $450. Regular pricing is until March 24th at $550. Late ticket purchases available until April 22nd at $600. And if you try to do it at DrupalCon, which you could, you'll pay $650.
Okay, great. Are you planning on going, John?
I am planning on going. Yes.
Not approved yet. I get it. All right, so my tip of the week, I recently launched a Drupal 8 website on our typical development stack and production stack, and I wanted to see how well it would do with all the new Drupal 8 caching on what I would consider a more minimal environment. So I spun up a droplet on DigitalOcean that was a Linux distribution with the lowest level of memory that they have in CPU, which I think is 500 megs of memory. Just use that one-click sort of install. It's going to be a Drupal site with the lowest server they offered, and I upload my database and my code, and the site was running really quickly. So I'm not sure if people generally consider 500 megabytes to be a small server. I do. But it actually ran very well with obviously no load or anything. Didn't do any load testing on it, but it was surprisingly fast. So when we did some Drupal 8 shows, and I don't know which show it was, but we talked at one point about how Drupal 8, people probably might be able to even use shared server environments for small websites. I mean, seeing what I saw here was clear to me that could be a possibility. So something to check into. If you're deploying very small sites, marketing sites, or maybe just blogs, you probably may not need may not need a dedicated server, or you could just use a low end one like it did with DigitalOcean. So something to take a look at.
Cache tags are pretty fantastic.
What's that?
The cache tags, which allows for that
exactly.
Automated caching, that level of caching is fairly fantastic.
Yeah. Have you guys run into modules that aren't using that? So
Yes.
Yeah, I'm running into that quite a bit where I've installed a Drupal 8 module. It's even, in a release state, and it's not calling the hashtag clear properly. So you have to clear cache when you change something.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was having that problem. I was actually having that problem with, I don't think it was views. I think it was entity queue. I was using entity queue with views, and the entity queue would update, but there was a known issue where the entity queue wouldn't update the cache tags to say like anything that uses this queue, update that content. So you ended up having to either clear the cache or just kind of waiting it out, which was not really favorable.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of issues with setting up your own cache tags. I assume clearing those tags. There's a bug in core that occasionally leaks metadata and makes it somewhat difficult to generate your own cache tags. So I actually have an issue open on D.O if somebody wants to look at it, or a couple that I'm following. I get a couple clients that are running into that issue, so it's not surprising. But if you're dealing with core entities and that kind of thing, it shouldn't be particularly difficult to get around.
All right, let's get into our topic for the day, high availability Drupal. So this episode, we're going to sort of take, I guess, sort of a high level look at high availability and things you should be planning on and things to consider if you have a site that needs high availability. What does high availability mean? Who wants to define that?
So high availability is a website that is going to have, a couple of things. It needs to be highly available, what does that mean? That means it needs to be available to either a large amount of people, or it needs to be up running continuously. And that's, I guess high availability is a kind of a combination of those two things. So you want your website to be able to serve to a large number of concurrent users, and you have an uptime that, I would say uptime is paramount. So you're looking at it as uptime being a deal breaker for you. In a lot of instances, websites that are e-commerce websites or websites that are financially important to the company are usually high availability or have some sort of uptime requirements. So
it's funny because I've had customers that don't fall into either of those categories, right? And it's not financially important to them. Not a large company, doesn't affect them in any way. But you know what? They're willing to pay to make sure that website is up. And have you guys run into that as well? That people just say, hey, you know what? I want a site that's 100% or 99.9%, and I will, what does it take to do that? And I'm willing to pay for it.
Yes, yeah. I've actually previously, company I used to work for had a client who had a marketing website. Purely marketing, just brochureware, nothing really, nothing really driving their business, and it was imperative that thing was up 100% of the time. So much so that we got into basically instantaneous failover if something happened to the server or something happened to a network appliance. And we'll talk about what that means. But the most important part of this website was a link to log into their client portal. And it had to be up all the time, which kind of fell for me at least into that that category.
Yeah, and we'll get more into this as well, but the level of high availability is something that varies client to client. There's no specific, hey, this means it's high availability. You need to, when you're working out your contract, you need to determine what level of high availability there is. And for a situation like that where just the link needs to be available, you can set up custom error codes that will provide that link. So even if there's there's a service that CloudFlare provides where you can create a custom 500 error. So if you have a client where they need that link to be available, if their site goes down, Cloudflare will just serve go into the client portal instead.
And that actually segues right into our first topic for this, which is planning. So, as Nick said, you're gonna do a lot of planning before you actually do any work or set anything up. And that planning, part of that planning is going to be to define what high availability means to your client. Is it uptime? Is it number of concurrent users? Is it both? Is it co-location? Is it disaster recovery? Is it failover? What's acceptable to them? From the most part, high availability websites, depending on what the client is doing, and if it's a moneymaker for them, it can have different requirements. For example, I used to work for a company local here in Rhode Island that had a corporate website, and then they had their storefront website where people could buy stuff, and they prioritized those as level 1 and level 2. The storefront website was always a level 1 site, which meant it had to be up all the time, had to have instantaneous failover, whole bunch of high availability features. And the level 2 site, which was the corporate site, corporate information site, was not as important. It had a lower uptime and guarantee, and didn't have instantaneous failover. So it's definitely a business decision, and that'll come into your planning phase as to how you handle those scenarios.
So let's talk about what kinds of things a customer may be concerned about when we're labeling it as this generic high availability. So John just mentioned that I think you said the sales website needed to be up all the time for that one customer.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of other scenarios that happen. So one of them could be that a customer has a corporate site and they get press at points of time. So they can have spikes. So
the Today Show effect?
Yeah, the Today Show effect, or whatever. I've had this before. It was the Fox News effect. So I had a customer that appeared on Fox News every other month as like one of those guest contributors. So during that period of time, shortly when he was on, there would be an intense spike on that site. The rest of the month, the rest of the 2 months leading up to that time and after that time, the site was pretty quiet. It could be handled with that configuration I talked about at the beginning of the show. But during that 12-hour period, a 6-hour period, it was pretty intense on the site. So it was those spikes that we need to worry about.
Right. And traffic patterns will be important to this. As you kind of look at the planning phase and what uptime and traffic looks like. Google Analytics is going to become your best friend, because you'll be able to say like, oh, Saturdays we get a lot more traffic than we do on Mondays, and so on and so forth. And you'll be able to kind of extrapolate from that what your traffic patterns look like.
And tying into past events, press releases and things like that, to know what those patterns look like when the site, if you look over a 6-month or 12-month period, looking at where those spikes are and what were the events that led up to them, and then get an understanding of, you could potentially set up an environment that was less during the slow times and then ramped up, like in an AWS environment. You could throw more stuff at the website 2 days before that marketing or that press release, and then 3 days after the marketing or press release, then you ramp the site back down again. Hey, Steven here. Sorry to interrupt the show, but wanted to let you know that after we recorded this podcast, Nick and I did a screencast with Mark Meyer from Load Impact. And Mark did a demonstration of their tool, which does load testing. So it's about a 24-minute video that gives a demonstration of their product, and we talk about load testing in general. So you might want to check that out. You can get it by signing up for our bonus content. Go to talkingdrupal.com/134. Now back to the show.
And that's actually an important note when planning. setting up some sort of workflow for those spikes, so that if you're a freelancer working with a client, you have the information on, hey, there's going to be a spike next week on this day because we're going to be on Fox News, or because we're going to be on the Today Show, or because we're launching this new product. The last thing you want to do is have an environment that is high availability and then not give your development team or your freelance team enough time to ramp up those additional resources if they need to, or prepare for it. I had a client a couple of weeks ago who was doing kind of like a live keynote, and they told me, I think the day before or maybe 2 days before they were doing it, that they were expecting a large increase in traffic to their website. So it kind of, sent us into a little bit of a scramble to figure out what we could do in the amount of time that we had to handle that spike in traffic. And luckily we were able to do it, and everything was fine. But provided that it had been a lot larger than anticipated, it could have gone bad.
Yeah, when you're approaching a project that needs to be highly available, you really want to get into the weeds. So when you look at high availability, you're really thinking about accessibility, how much access people have to the website. So you're not just saying, hey, we're just going to guarantee that the site doesn't go down, or that the site is up 99.99% of the time. You have to actually define what up means. So how sometimes it's as far as, how much time is acceptable before the first bite, how much time is acceptable before the DOM loads, how much time is acceptable before the page finishes loading completely with all assets. And you need to sometimes define those different levels depending on the traffic load. So you don't want to just say, hey, we guarantee that time to first byte will never be longer than 5 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds, and the DOM will be 1 second, and whatever. Because what happens if you end up on Reddit and you end up getting 600,000 users in an hour clicking on your website? So you need to define concurrent users and levels of speed that you can expect at that time, and then you need to test that and make sure that it's achievable. I mean, saying that your time to first byte is going to be less than 5 milliseconds and the DOM is going to load in less than 200 milliseconds, may not be realistic, depending on the networking architecture that your host provides. So it's important that you define down to the last detail, what you're guaranteeing as a highly available site. For most clients, for most smaller clients, highly available can just mean you have a couple of different you have a couple of different servers, and if one of them fails, you have a load balancer that switches to the other. And for a lot of mid-sized clients where they just want to make sure they don't have a period of 5, 10, 20 minutes of downtime, that's enough. When you're starting to talk about high traffic and high performance, high availability, it's a different matter.
So what would be a key indicator to you guys when you're first talking and planning with a customer that they could be a high availability candidate, and that a normal process or maybe some extended planning needs to be done?
Well, I think most clients already know if they're gonna need high availability, or if they're going to. So let me rephrase that. Larger clients are going to know if they're going to need high availability, and in most of the RFPs or the proposals that you get from them for the web project, they're going to have requirements in there of, hey, we need to serve 500 concurrent users. If it's a smaller client that may not be as familiar with high availability and their needs, you have to, I guess, ask some probing questions as far as what their expectation is. And to be fair, everybody's expectation is going to be, or at least smaller clients who may not be educated to this, their expectation is going to be that my website's up all the time and it's always accessible and it never has any problems. So a little bit of education needs to happen there as to what's realistic.
That can come in the form of, hey, I need to see your analytics.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. And
that usually tells the truth.
Yeah, I mean, you want to be careful when you're talking to your client about this, because if you pose the question, hey, can you say what, especially smaller clients saying, hey, what's an acceptable downtime for your website? They're going to say, oh, I don't ever want it to go down. Or if you give them a percentage, you say, okay, it's 99.9% uptime. They may not understand that means, okay, then your site can be down for, I forget exactly, but something like half an hour or an hour a month. So it's important that when you're asking these questions that you're careful. I mean, if the client isn't coming to me asking for a high availability website, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, my first indicator is looking at the traffic. I also ask about, what their expectations are for launch, what their expectations are down the road for traffic and growth. But the vast majority of sites, unless they have some sort of avenue to get on national television, or they have some sort of avenue for creating a viral, post or something on Reddit, the odds of them getting the traffic spike that would bring down their site is fairly low.
So Nick, I always ask the question, and I do this not just for performance related stuff, but I'm always asking questions like, what are your business plans over the next 6 months? Do you have any products you're launching? Do you have any initiatives going on? Those kinds of things are usually indicators, because sometimes, especially if you're dealing with startups or newer businesses, they don't always, and the people you're dealing with, if they've never had. So like John, you said a customer will always come to me if they know they want high availability and tell me they need it. What often happens though is people don't know they need it until they've gone through that experience, right? Of having something be down because they were successful in their business, right? And so understanding what they're trying to do as a company, and it often leads to the reason why you're talking to them, by the way, anyway, is that you're in the door because they are doing something new. They're refreshing something. They have some new initiatives. It's always interesting to know what are the things that are coming out, and then kind of drilling into that a little bit. It will help you plan, because they don't always know to say, unless they've been through it before, they don't always know to say, we need a high available site, or we have, we've got a press release that's going to be promoted highly over the next 6 months. They don't usually think of those things, because when they go to websites, they're always up. It's rare to find a website that's down. So you don't always think of that unless you've been in the business for a while and gone through that process.
If you are a Starbucks fan, it seems every year I get the Starbucks for Life email around this time. Yeah. And every year I do what most people do when they get an email. I go to the website, and every year the website seems to kind of crap out on me because it's getting hammered by God knows how many coffee lovers across the country and the world, all trying to get their Starbucks for life. So it's just an interesting look at a much larger company, obviously, but they still have their issues. And to bring it back to Drupal, before Lullabot started doing the Grammys website on Grammys night, that website would go down repeatedly. So even the best laid plans and the people that plan for this kind of stuff aren't flawless.
I have a great tip. I have a great tip for people out there, for developers, and I do this, and I have a folder on my computer for this. Anytime I find a website that's down, and it's a recognizable website, I take a screenshot of it, and I stick it in a file. I have probably 100 of these now, and it's ammunition that when I have a site that goes down for a customer, I can pull up these screenshots and say, just so you know, it's not just you. Like, look, last month, here are 2 websites that were down. And screenshots from the Starbucks, from the AT&T, from Google, we've all seen Google down at times. And having that kind of stuff as a developer in your sort of protect yourself or cover your butt kind of thing to say that it doesn't it happens to everyone. Having that detail in a file folder somewhere is always helpful.
Yeah, and it's important to note, with your clients too, not to minimize the setting up a highly available site and architecture, because it's a lot of work, especially for the upper echelon of high availability. It's not a small task, but it's definitely achievable if you know what the targets are, you know what the expectations are. But like John had kind of alluded to, if you have a situation where your site goes down because you have an unexpected traffic spike, it's almost impossible to get a highly available architecture underneath a site that's being currently hammered. I mean, at that point, you're generally in a situation where you need to wait until it's over and then mitigate that.
Some hosting resources, and this is actually Nick's hammering away at the segues, so we're going to talk about hosting next. But some hosting resources in that instance do have the ability, if your website is getting hammered or your web server is getting hammered, to increase resources to that web server to try to help lessen the amount of downtime or to help lessen the blow to the server. But I do agree with Nick 100% that, if you haven't planned for this and it happens, sometimes the only thing that you can do when it happens is wait until it's over and then plan for the next time. So once you've done all your planning and you have your goals and your numbers and you have your kind of your benchmarks, the next thing is to implement this, right? And I know we work with a couple of different hosting vendors to
implement what, John?
Well, implement your high availability network and website. So we're going to go on the assumption here that everybody's going to be doing high availability Drupal. So your website's going to be a Drupal powered website, right? And there are some things in Drupal that you can do, to increase your performance. We're not going to turn this into a Drupal performance show, but ultimately, your high availability is going to come from your network and the hosting environment that you're on. So when we say that we've done our planning, we know what we need to implement or what we need to achieve, and we need to implement stuff, we're talking about hosting and networking devices and tools.
Yeah. So, I mean, for the smaller sites, the kind of sites that Steve was talking about at the beginning of the show that could live on just a DigitalOcean droplet, you're typically looking at a single server. You typically will put your website on a hosting platform, something like Media Temple possibly, or DigitalOcean, that has Apache on it, or Nginx, has your database and your files. When you start looking at high availability, one of the primary things that you need to identify and remove are single points of failure. A single point of failure is if something goes away, your site goes down. So if you only have one instance of MySQL running and the one connection to the database, then if MySQL goes away, your site goes away. If you only have one webhead running Apache, running your website and it crashes, your site goes away. So when you start looking at high availability, your primary goal, aside from performance, is setting up redundancy and enough caching layers so that if something goes awry, there's something else to step in and take its place, and there's something in front of it that prevents the end user from seeing that hiccup.
So what are those single points of failure?
So there's a bunch of them.
Before you go into each individual one, is it worth explaining what a single point of failure is?
Be my guest.
So a single point of failure is basically a single thing that can take your website down, right? It's a putting all of your eggs in one basket approach. And with high availability websites, that's what you're trying to mitigate as much as humanly possible. Now, you can get really crazy and duplicate every piece of your environment so that if anything goes wrong with one, you have a backup. Or you can strategically duplicate items to minimize cost, but still allow for a high availability environment.
Yeah. So you have, in order for a website to work, you typically have, for a Drupal website to work, you typically need 2 or 3 things. You need, the DNS to be set up and point you at the website. You need Apache or Nginx, some sort of web server to execute the PHP, and you need a database to store the data in configuration. So in a typical high availability site, one of the first things that you're going to do before you start duplicating things, one of the first things that you do is you put a reverse proxy in front of the web server. That's probably the single biggest thing that you can do, which is something like Varnish or Squid. And what that does is it basically has a caching layer, which is generally on a separate server, that sits between the end user and the Apache server. And I'll just use, instead of saying Apache or Nginx every time, I'll just say Apache. So what that does is that prevents, especially in an anonymous environment, that prevents the vast majority of requests from ever hitting Apache. So most requests are being served by Varnish, and Varnish itself is extremely efficient at serving the same content to multiple users. To give an example, Apache can generally handle 100 to 200 concurrent users at a time, whereas Varnish with minimal tweaking can generally get 2,500 to 3,000 users at a time. So it's an order of magnitude larger.
Hey, just to note on episode 119, Talking Drupal, so talkingdrupal.com/119, we did talk about Drupal 8 performance and caching, and we did go a little bit into Varnish there, if someone wants some more information on that.
I think you skipped out there for a second. Did you cat roll over again?
I don't think so. You can hear me?
No, but you froze up when you started talking about episode 119.
Okay. I keep going.
So yeah, so like I said, the first thing that you want to look at generally is putting a reverse proxy in front of everything. Once you have the reverse proxy in place, you can begin to add additional layers behind that. So the kind of the second thing that you usually start to do is you start to provide additional web heads. So you will provide, you can provide more than one Apache server that sits behind Varnish, and you tell Varnish, hey, these are the 2 or 3 or 5 or however many are necessary Apache servers that can serve our website. So if you have trouble reaching one, go to the next one. So you have a situation where if somebody tries to visit your website, Varnish doesn't have the page cached, and it goes to server A, and server A is down, it will just go to server B and get the page and then serve it. And you can customize how that works as much as you want. I mean, you can have it do round robin. You can have it set up so that when somebody goes to a particular server, they always go to that same server. You can set it up so that whatever server has the most traffic gets the least amount of requests in the future. So there's a bunch of customization you can do.
And those customizations are actually done typically to a load balancer, which sits in front of the network. Typically,
well, not quite. Not the ones that I'm talking about are Varnish level configurations. But you can, now that you brought up load balancers can sit in front of the Varnish cache and can do the same thing. You can actually have multiple Varnish servers between your Apache servers and the load balancer. And the load balancer can divert traffic in a similar fashion. The difference is the load balancer isn't caching the full page. The load balancer is just kind of divvying up traffic between multiple locations.
Sure.
So usually if you're setting up something before you do the load balancer too much, the next thing that you do is you add a redundant database. So, I mean, Amazon has a really good offering for this. But there's obviously other technologies you can use or other service providers you can use, but they make it pretty easy to have a database, a master database and a bunch of slave databases. So if something goes awry, your website will automatically switch from connecting from one database to another so that the site won't go down. So, at a very high level, you end up with the situation where you have a load balancer that kind of tries to, depending on your rules, generally tries to even out traffic across one or more Varnish servers, which serve as a reverse proxy to your web heads, which are actually serving the PHP application. Varnish will then point to one or more Apache servers, and the Apache servers are connecting to a redundant MySQL or a redundant database layer. So those are some of the main things to think about. Now, there's other peripherals that can certainly make setting up a high availability website easier. So high availability doesn't always necessarily mean exactly high performance, but if you have a non-performance site, it's very difficult to make a high availability site.
So I would say I would agree with Nick. With Drupal, and anybody that's built or worked in Drupal knows that a lot of stuff is stored in the database. So database redundancy and failover for database servers is really important when you're thinking of a high availability environment. Varnish is great, and having multiple webheads is important as well. But if you have all of that in front of one database server, you're definitely there's your single point of failure right there. So those are all really good points to think about.
And I'd like to add here, Nick, you just kind of went through a big sort of bunch of stuff, which is great information. If someone is not familiar with some of these things and has never set them up before, and I know you've done it because I've done them with you on projects, where should someone start in understanding this and trying it and testing it? How do you go about figuring these things out?
Can I ask a question, like the clarification question on your question? Are these people working with a freelancer, or are they trying to do this themselves, or how's this?
I mean, I don't think that matters. I mean, someone is now listening to this and just wants to try this and learn some of this stuff to implement high availability. I mean, unless the answer makes a difference on what kind of person they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can always talk to us on the show. I mean, you can send us a tweet, give us a call. I mean, we do this.
This could be another answer other than that.
If you need help, you can always give us a call. But there's
you can hire somebody that knows what they're doing, right? I think is what Nick's trying to get at there. I mean, you could always call us and ask us a question, tweet us, that sort of thing. But if you're looking to do this, if you're a tech person in your company and you're like, oh, we need this, there are a couple of different avenues I can imagine somebody taking. One would be the simple one of Googling to figure out what information you need to know and to learn more about load balancers or database replication, that sort of thing. The other thing is, depending on how serious you are about this, go out and look at different hosting providers, because I know a lot of hosting providers out there will help you set up environments like this. We've worked with Black Mesh in the past for environments like this, and I will say they're awesome at planning this stuff out and giving you a really good idea of what each network piece of network equipment is going to do, and what you need and what you don't need. Rackspace, I know, does the same sort of thing. So going out to the hosting providers and saying, hey, I'm interested in a high availability environment. I need to know, what I need and how much it's going to cost is also a good step. Nick's right. You can work with a contractor or a company like Oomph to help you in this area if need be. But between Google and the hosting provider themselves, you should be able to, if you're an internal tech resource, get all the information that you need.
Yeah, I mean, like John said, you can certainly talk to, all the big...
So, wait, hang on a second, Nick. So we've given options of going to other people to help you.
Yeah, I was gonna address the other half of the question. So, you can always talk. All the big Drupal hosting providers provide highly available options, and semi jokingly, as we said, we can provide those services as well. But if you're somebody that's looking to build this yourself, or you're a freelancer that's looking to learn how to do it, there are resources, just like many other resources. There's Stack Overflow. I mean, you really need to, although looking for this kind of information is a little bit different than looking for general Drupal information. One of the difficulties is a highly available environment needs to be tailored to your specific use case. There's not a resource where you can just say, okay, I have a Drupal site that needs to be highly available. Follow step A, B, C, D, and you're going to end up with a highly available site. It depends on a lot of variables, like, what's not just your traffic pattern, but are your users logged in or not? Do you have third-party sites that are or third-party APIs that are interacting with your site? There's a bunch of different things. So the strategy that I took when learning this was choosing a specific section of the architecture that I mentioned previously. So, for example, Varnish. So, in order to set up a highly available site, you need to understand how a reverse proxy works, whether it's Varnish, Squid, or Nginx, or something else. So, I would spend some time setting up Varnish on a server and pointing at a website, and then getting to know all the different options that Varnish provides and seeing how it affects a particular website that I was working with. So you're not going to sit down one day and say, okay, I need to build a highly available site, set everything up, and get that figured out in 2 days' time. You need to understand each of the different components and then how that component will interact with your particular use case. So it is a section where even if you're not hiring somebody else to do it or hiring a hosting company to provide it, it is certainly a project where having a consultant or having somebody who's done before that can advise, mentor you is extremely valuable.
Nick, I love where you're going with this, and it's kind of where I was heading, is that you don't, I think having knowledge about building, we're totally off our agenda right now, which is cool. It's fine. But having skills to understand and implement high availability sites is valuable to have, because it gives you opportunity to service people that you might not generally do if you don't have those skills. And a way to learn this, you don't have to wait for a customer to have this problem, which I think is what you were getting at, Nick, is that you can set up these environments pretty easy on your own. My tip at the beginning was a DigitalOcean droplet. You can set those things up. You pay by the minute for those servers and can spin them up for hours or days at a time, multiple servers, connect them and try these things. So if you wanted to test if you want to set up a Varnish environment, you could, Nick says find a mentor. That's great. If you had a mentor that could help you with that stuff, it's perfect. You can also do enough. I think there's enough resources out there to kind of get you started in these places.
Yeah.
Do a little searching.
It
is great, and I've done this myself. They're great nighttime, cold, snowy day, stay in the house projects to work on.
Yeah, and
get
if
yourself educated in these spaces.
If you don't want to, purchase or pay for, or don't have the ability to pay for DigitalOcean server to learn this stuff, you can many times set up because many times a highly available service requires many multiple servers. So it's even if you get the cheapest one, which I think is $10 a month, you might need 5 or 10 of those to really emulate what you're going to need. I would recommend looking into Docker, because Docker will have images that are specific to each piece that you need, whether, like I said, it's Squid or Varnish or Cassandra or something else. And you can connect them to each other in a network that is similar to what you will need for the actual projects that you'll have in the future. And you can then log into them and, see how they're configured and play with them. And you're not worried about necessarily needing to start from scratch and reinstall something. If you break something with Docker, you can just shut it off and turn it back on and reset it, and it will take 30 seconds or less. So if you can get Docker set up and running on your local machine, you can and there's a ton of tutorials out there for that. You can test a bunch of this hardware in isolation and as part of a total network. So we have, I think there's a couple of other things that might be worth mentioning in passing on the hosting side that are certainly helpful in making a performance site, but aren't necessarily required for high availability. And the first one is, which we mentioned in passing, is the CDN. So just being able to offload some of that, some of the files, and depending on the CDN you're using, sometimes they'll serve as a sort of reverse proxy as well. It can be really helpful because you're just preventing some of that traffic from hitting your servers, which of course reduces the load on your servers, which makes it much easier to set up a high availability application.
We often mention CloudFlare here because I think it's a service that we're all using, and it provides a little bit more. CloudFlare, it's a CDN, it's a security tool, it's a high availability option. So you really should take a look at that.
And that's actually something. So the client who gave us 2 day heads up that they were going to have a spike in traffic. That's something that we had implemented was we put CloudFlare in front of their server to try to mitigate some of the traffic that was actually hitting the server, and worked out really well. Their site already had CloudFlare on it, but this was another page or another site on the server that they were using. I think something else to note, and this kind of goes into like playing with it yourself or trying to get more knowledge to it. Also, is a great high availability option is AWS and Amazon Web Services. And the reason I say that is, as a hosting platform, they're great, and they're definitely capable of doing high availability and allowing you to spin up new instances if you need more horsepower. But the reason I say that they're a good way to kind of get your feet wet and to learn about this is they have a lot of tools and a lot of high availability features, load balancers, firewalls, so on and so forth, that you can implement to kind of set up your own high availability network and start kind of getting familiar with this stuff. Now, that comes
when you're using Acquia, aren't you really using AWS?
Yes, Acquia does use Amazon Web Services for their hosting provider. The caveat with AWS is Certain services, I think they'll give you a free year on, but some services you will have to pay for. The other thing is, too, that you have to be pretty familiar with how to configure a network and configure a server, because AWS requires you to kind of get in there and do some of your own configuration.
They have great tutorials, though.
Yeah, but it's a steep learning curve. But high availability itself is too. I mean, I want to point out one thing too. If you're not hiring somebody, or you're not going with a hosting provider, and you're setting up a high availability situation, there is a fair amount of DevOps involved. I mean, you're not clicking and, it's not point and click and you're installing something. You just have to find the pieces. You're going to have to, whether you're on CentOS or Ubuntu or something else, you're going to have to install reverse proxy. You're going to have to configure it. You're going to have to figure out how to keep it updated, keep it upgraded. You're going to have to figure out how to make sure that all the different versions of what you're running are compatible with each other. It's not point and click. And Amazon almost, for somebody new to Amazon, it almost suffers from having too many options. It's very easy, especially if you're looking to, and it can be very expensive if you make a mistake. It's very easy to get bogged down in trying to determine what kind of Amazon instance you need in particular, whether it's EC2 or M5 or, whatever. It's very easy to get bogged down in the details. That being said, setting up a multi-server environment, DigitalOcean is great for spinning up a single or a couple of droplets, but the networking side of DigitalOcean is a lot weaker than it is in Amazon, which is one of the reasons why some of the largest companies in the world use Amazon, because it gives you that control. But don't expect to, if you're used to using something like Pantheon or Aqua or even like Media Temple, don't expect to jump into Amazon and be up and running in a day or two. It takes a fair amount of dedication. That being said, thousands of people have done it. You can do it too. Just be patient. I believe in you. I believe in our listeners.
Yeah, which is a great reason to sort of burn that candle slowly. Jump into it, get familiar with it, play with it, understand it, and grow into it. And maybe you can find that customer or that project that will help you accelerate that quicker, that learning.
Yeah, I mean, the types of projects that really need high availability tend to be much more rewarding and much more interesting. But it is something that if you have a client that truly needs high availability, you're typically signing an SLA, which is an agreement saying, hey, here's what we agree to do, here are the consequences if we don't. And those consequences can sometimes be severe. So it's not something that you want to jump into and just say, hey, I'll figure it out as I go. You definitely want to have some sort of understanding of what you're getting into, before you make those agreements.
Yeah, if you're a good salesperson and can sell into that customer, set up the SLA, but put into your pricing to get that mentor, that consultant involved in this project, and partner with someone and do it right. Learn from them as you build that environment.
The other nice thing, or the other worthwhile point here, again, going back to working with a hosting provider, is recently we did a project with Black Mesh, and they were great to work with as far as SLA goes. Any issue that we had, any update that we needed, anything, we put a ticket in with them, and they jumped right on it, and they were able to really help us out.
Hey, Black Mesh, $50.
So if Black Mesh wants to sponsor, reach out.
Yeah. That's what we need to start doing, right?
But
when we mention a product, we just say, hey, give us $50.
And that to be fair, most hosting providers, if you pay for that service level, will do that for you. I know Rackspace is infamous for their fanatical support. So definitely don't be afraid to jump into it yourself, but definitely find a mentor, find a provider that's willing to help you out when you get into that bleep situation, because it will happen. and you will need somebody to support you in that.
I want to bring up something with like the companies like Pantheon and Acquia. They kind of isolate you, right, from this configuration and setup, because I think they both position themselves as high availability.
They do. Yep.
Caching, multi-server. You don't need to worry about, we'll spin up stuff as we need to spin it up.
Correct. Yeah. Pantheon and Acquia, the reason I personally haven't mentioned them, they're both great companies. They're both great hosting providers. The caveat there, as Steve said, is they have this kind of scalability built into their system. So when you start a project with Acquia, they're going to say, what's your availability? What do you need? And they're going to make sure that they set up your environment to support that. Same thing with Pantheon. They have a business environment that they will set up for you, and it has the ability to spin up new instances as you need them. The reason I mention Rackspace and Black Mesh is because those are two providers that will basically set it up with you, or help you to set up physical servers or virtual servers and load balancers and everything, so you can actually do this yourself, set it up yourself, see your network architecture yourself. You're not going to necessarily get that from Acquia or Pantheon.
But there's certainly high availability solutions.
Definitely. Definitely. Pantheon actually has a pretty cool tool where if you're in their kind of high availability sector, it'll show you all of your nodes, so you can see all the servers you have set up. And you can add another one by dragging and dropping. It's a pretty cool interface for that kind of functionality. But I don't know. I don't know if that's showing you load balancers and every network appliance, or if it's just showing you kind of like your web servers.
Yeah, you can kind of only add web servers there, I think.
So we've kind of been a little bit all over the place with high availability, I think, but have covered a lot of stuff today. Is there anything else you guys wanted to bring up before we close out here?
We probably don't have time to dig into this too much, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention part of high availability is a disaster recovery plan.
Yeah.
You need to, I think John kind of alluded to it, but you need to know who's in charge and what happens if something goes wrong. You need to know what the steps are to take if the site goes down, and so that if you do have downtime, you can get back up, before you break your SLA. And that includes things like, if we'll have a 5-minute response to a tier 2 person. If they can't fix it, we'll have a 20-minute response to a tier 1 person, et cetera, et cetera. So you have a chain of people who can take care of issues if they come up on the website, and you have a plan in place. And that can really, because if you have a project like this and the site goes down, it's easy to panic. But if you have that disaster recovery plan, you can just follow the steps.
You need to keep in mind, too, that often if you're providing a contracted service level agreement, SLA, with your customer, you're really passing on, unless you're the hosting provider yourself, which is probably not anyone that's listening to this, you're really passing on the service level agreement that the vendor you're using has as well. Keep that in mind. So,
yeah, you don't want to set this up on HostGator or Bluehost or something, and then be surprised when your architecture is working, but their entire east zone is down for 12 days with no explanation.
Right. And often those lower end hosting companies, they don't have the service level agreements that you're looking to commit to, which is the 99 point something uptime. Yeah. I mean, because in a service level agreement usually means there's a ramification of the service not being met, which is not what you have with those hosting providers.
Yeah, I mean, it
wasn't available for the $20 a month, it wasn't available for that 30 days. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not managing the servers yourself, which I couldn't. If you're not managing physical servers yourself, which I probably would almost never recommend, you're either with a company like Pantheon or Acquia, or you're with somebody like Rackspace, Black Mesh, or Amazon, DigitalOcean too. But you're not hosting, a truly highly available site on Media Temple. Although you can use some of these things like CDNs and load balancers and reverse proxies to make a website highly performant and much less likely to go down and more resilient to spikes. So it's not like that's the other advantage. If you learn how to build a truly highly available site, you learn what tools you can use on most sites. So you can make a site that has a fair amount of traffic that doesn't really need a high availability agreement not go down, even if they're getting 100,000 hits in a day because you've put Varnish in front of them and two web heads. So.
Okay, John Picozzi.
Here I am.
Recommended the module of the week. One of your favorite modules, I think.
Is it really?
I thought so when we did the show notes together.
Yeah, I love to spread holiday cheer. It's that time of year, so spread your cheer. Anyway, the module of the week is the Christmas lights module. I know probably last year, maybe the year before, we did the snowflakes module or something like that, made your website snow. This one adds Christmas lights to your website. So if you're in Drupal and you want to spread some holiday cheer, install Christmas lights and see what happens.
All right, very good.
358 sites using it. I wonder how many of them installed it just to see how it works and will completely forget. They'll get a call from the client like, why are there Christmas lights?
It's February. Why do I have Christmas lights?
Nick, you're not thinking of the right use case for this. It's a bunch of e-commerce sites that are like, oh, we need Christmas lights at the top of our site, and they've installed it. You're going to leave it installed for the holiday season, and then they're going to shut it off until next year.
There you go.
So wait, it doesn't shut off automatically? So it's like when I put up a Christmas tree when I was single, it would be up until March.
Right. It was there so long you didn't even see it anymore.
There's a problem there. I leave my Christmas tree up until my birthday.
When's your birthday?
Yeah.
February.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So as we wrap up today, John, if people want to get in touch with you or learn more about you or find out where you are, where can they do that?
They can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, and you can find out everything about me and Umthink at umthink.com. How
about you, Nick?
You can find me pretty much everywhere online at Nixvan, NICXVAN. And if you have questions about high availability, feel free to reach out.
Great. And I'm Stephen Cross. I never say my own name. It's interesting, right? Always forget that. So I'm the voice that no one knows the name to. And you can find me on Twitter at Stephen Cross with a PH. And I encourage everyone to go to talkingdrupal.com, sign up for our newsletter, check it out. We're not going to spam you. We've got some interesting stuff coming out of there. We had some bonus content planned for this episode. Hasn't quite happened yet. Working with a vendor to get you some interesting stuff on load testing, which we never talked about in the show. We never got to that bullet. So bonus content will have some information about load testing. And if you sign up for the newsletter when that bonus content's available, you'll learn about it and can take a look at it. I encourage you to do that. And I don't think we'll record again. No, we will record one more time before the new year. So we can save our Happy New Year's, right?
We can.
Great. Take care, guys.
Have a good one.
Bye.